Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discoveries, our discussions, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2022. That brings us to that release, which had been in the Criterion Collection at spine number 227. It had been in the Criterion Collection under a DVD, but now we see it return once again, this time in a Blu-ray edition under a 4K restoration. And it is the work which is described as being from the year 1943, once again at spine number 227. The filmmaker is Henri-Georges Cluzot. And the name of this work is Le Corbeau. Extraordinary and complex work described as being from the year 1943, and among its cast we have people like Pierre Larquet and Jeannette Leclerc and Pierre Frenet and others. And this is of course the work by Henri-Georges Cluzot, and is right here. Once again, I apologize profusely for my very poor pronunciation of the French language. I hope you can forgive me. But the name of this work is Le Corbeau. Now, it is my understanding that the word Le Corbeau can be translated into English as the raven. And when we think about that, we understand that this is indeed a very key point, or it's a reflection of the key point, or one of the key points of this, as I say, very dense and very complex and indeed very dark and very morally complicated world that we see presented in the context of this film, Le Corbeau. So challenging, so filled with unknowns, and so much filled with a sense of unease and suspense, and indeed a type of chill in the air that is part of the feeling when one watches Le Corbeau. And indeed, one can say that this is stemming from many aspects, such as the plot or the story structure of this work, Le Corbeau. And the story is focusing in on this provincial town in France. And this provincial town is populated by a number of people. And these people, the population, again, the characters that we meet, can be said to be inhabiting maybe a wide spectrum of, say, class and economic background, and also maybe differing, say, life circumstances and the like, but they are all part of this community in one form or another. And another thing that bonds or forms a connection between and among these members of the community is that it is currently plagued by some unknown person or persons. We don't know who or what is going on here, but it is plagued by some person or persons unknown that are writing, that is or are writing, poison pen letters to various people in the community, essentially writing scandalous, controversial, scathing, and salacious, and very horrific details about personal lives, whether it's true or not. Again, that's part of the discussion, that's part of the trajectory, or various trajectories or subplots of the film Le Corbeau. And in any event, these poison pen letters are creating quite a chaotic and quite a confusing state of situations indeed, again, in this town, focusing in, for example, on one of the main characters, the Pierre Frenet character, Dr. Germain. And we have, therefore, the human relationships that are formed and that have been formed, that have been forged over the course of the times of these characters. We meet them at a certain point in time, certain familial characters or certain familial relationships, certain relationships based on profession, relationships based on, say, emotional intimacy, others based on, say, a taut and tense rivalry, etc., or relationships based on seemingly insignificant happenstance or circumstance, strangers who may or may not have some kind of secret agendas, etc. So this is to say that this is a very tense and quite a complex world that is being portrayed here against the backdrop of this provincial town setting, where slowly but surely things begin to emerge. Certain agendas tend to be emerging, or certain, say, back scenes or backroom types of discussions are appearing. Secrets that remain secret in certain circles, but that are open to the public in other circles, give us a sense of unease and uncertainty, and indeed the darkness and the suspenseful and the tense that is part of this world of CORBEAU. Because in this context, we have, I think, a number of various forms of this film, or a number of various levels of this film, which I think can be said to be emerging. One such level or form could be that this is a mystery, an intense suspense thriller mystery, or in many senses maybe because we are dealing with certain plots or subplots that, again, in a general sense, I don't want to go into too much detail here, but in a general sense, do involve life or death stakes, do involve life or death. So in many senses, one can classify this work, Le Corbeau, as a murder mystery film. There is a mystery element behind this. Who is the perpetrator? Who is the person committing these vile, terrible acts? Who is the raven? Who is Le Corbeau? So in that way, on that level, this film acts as a very absorbing, a very tense mystery thriller. And to borrow the word thriller here, or suspense, in that way too, or in that similar vein, this film also, on a similar level, acts as a suspense film. There are elements of high tension, and that tension is derived from, or it comes about because of many scenarios that are portrayed here. Of course, there are the scenarios of the vile or the vicious or the menacing or perhaps the evil that are occurring, and also coupled with the unknown factor, who or what is behind this terrible stuff that is happening to this town or to these townsfolk. And also too, the notion of trust or lack of trust, or secrets, or people not necessarily being who they seem to be on the surface. And so this idea of the unknown, not being sure, even in seemingly innocent or seemingly tranquil or quite peaceful conversations that can be had with various characters, such as the conversations between Pierre Frenet and others here, the characters played by Pierre Frenet and others here, those might have a seemingly tranquil ambiance to them, which is also, I think, added to by, say, the seemingly tranquil setting of this town that we find ourselves in. But I think that adds to the tension or suspense, because there's this great wonderfully poetic contradiction in terms of the tranquil and the peaceful seeming on the one hand, but seemingly hiding things that are very dark and disturbing underneath. And that divide creates a sense of tension, or yes, indeed, suspense. Again, who to trust, we're not quite sure. And especially when things are, the ante is upped when it comes to the stakes, and the stakes are raised because of the, again, vile and quite a damaged sense that these poison pen letters are taking the characters on. I mean, this really gives us a sense of the uneasy and indeed disturbing, and thus the suspenseful or the thrilling. So that also is one of the deep levels of this film, Le Corbeau. Also, I mean, in those terms, it does have a sense of the entertaining as well, as suspense thrillers can be, and indeed they are. And I should point out, too, that one of the supplements for this release, Le Corbeau, does talk about this work, the entertainment factor, and the entertainment factor in the context of French cinema during the Nazi occupation, during the early 1940s, again during the Second World War in Europe. And so this has there's a certain a sense of how French cinema was operating during such very complex time. And one of the discussions to be had in one of the supplements talks about the importance of entertainment of French cinema to the population who are still in France during the occupation, but that this form of entertainment is in no way a type of quote unquote banal sense of entertainment in that sense, but rather it's an entertainment in the idea that this sort of film was required in a way to help people who were part of the population at the time, to help people to essentially escape from the harshness of the realities of the day. And so that in that way, to this idea of the entertainment of this type of genre film, or these the ways in which this film can be described as a genre film or various types of genre, I think is a very important point of emphasis that makes this film, I think, in the viewpoint of a suspense thriller, I think a very appropriate one indeed. And indeed, other labels or other genres or other classifications can be added to it. For instance, the great essay that's included here by Alan Williams, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, also mentions it in the context of, say, film noir, or the emergence of film noir, which we'll see, of course, in various traditions and forms. But here, one can say that there are some spiritual connections, shall we say, excuse me, between the film noir tradition and then a work like Le Corbeau, Henri-Georges Cluzot's work Le Corbeau. So there are various forms and dynamics that one can view this film in, and one can have a discussion of this film about in view or in lieu or in light of such perspectives, genre-based perspectives, which I think is one of the brilliant facets of Le Corbeau, the fact that it's so malleable and it has so many possibilities of forms and discussion, even within the context of, say, a conversation of cinema form. I mean, even in that conversation, which is a great conversation, I think, to have, it has many different possibilities. So this is one of the great strengths, I think, of a work like Corbeau, which has been lauded and applauded and celebrated by many critics and admirers of this work, and indeed of the works of Cluzot. So that is one area that I think this work operates so fundamentally well and so unforgettably. Another way too, and I mentioned it just now in this conversation, is that there is this way in which this film is inextricably linked with the history and the context of history, and indeed the reckoning with history, how this film figures in the context of Cluzot's career and when it was made, in the early 1940s during the occupation of France, and the specific circumstances of continental films. This conversation will be part of it's a very important conversation to have, and this will be part of the conversation that we will speak about when we talk about the supplements that can be found with this great Criterion release. And we'll talk about that in the latter half of this video. But this is also something to keep in mind when one is watching Le Corbeau, because there's a lot of context that I think is definitely worth examining and considering when one is considering and one is taking into consideration the professional life and the career of Henri-Georges Cluzot, especially during this period, and especially work like Le Corbeau, which again we understand was so controversial and so much part of an intense debate that occurred after the liberation of France at the end of the war, which is also part of the discussion with the supplements. That this context is so important; it cannot be, I think, overstated enough. I think it needs to be emphasized very much when considering this work, Le Corbeau. So this is another level in which this film, I think, operates with a great deal of complexity, and so this is worth having, I think, some background on. And indeed, I think the Criterion Collection, this Blu-ray release, does a pretty good job of this. But of course, we'll talk about those details a little bit later in the latter half of this video. And two, we have going to the artistry and craft of Henri-Georges Cluzot and company. We have, again, connecting maybe to the earlier part of this discussion, how this film gets under one's skin, or how this film talks about relationships and the idea of relationships that seem to have a certain foundation and a kind of emotional core on the one hand, but then maybe throughout the course of the film, we see those relationships or our understandings or expectations of such relationships upended or totally unearthed, revealing some kind of rot or some kind of, of moral coldness underneath, or perhaps a type of miscommunication or miscommunication leading to the obscuring of truth. And that obscuring of truth leads to, as one of the unfortunate results of that, more lies and deception, and those lies and deception can lead to even more possibilities of life and death stakes. And so this is part of the world and landscape. It's presented in this way that shows a sense of the sinister and the nuanced in terms of the framing and lighting, but at the same time, as I indicated before, Cluzot and company give us this portrait of this picturesque and tranquil and serene and peaceful seeming area and locale. Indeed, these performances and these actors who are filling these roles that seem on the surface to have a sense of the tranquil and the peaceful about them, parent-children relationships, children playing in the street or in the hallway, or relationships that are innocently or seemingly innocently developed between certain persons on an intimate and romantic level, etc., or marriages or things of that nature. But these turn ugly and these turn sinister, and they turn quite cold, and they turn cold almost on an instant. And so this is either the effect of type of an external threat, or maybe this is an indication of the rot or the moral rot, or the type of internal darkness that one can say is maybe one of the arguments of the film Le Corbeau, at least one of the interpretations that one can have. Again, a film that is, I think, so malleable and so much subject to many forms of interpretation, one of which being maybe the external forces causing the internal rot underneath of the various characters, or maybe that rot was already there to begin with, and one didn't need the external stimulus of the outside world causing the internal rot. Or perhaps another interpretation is there's no internal rot, but rather this is a way in which these characters are trying to deal with situations on a quote-unquote honest or direct level. And I think there are many other possibilities in terms of interpretation, especially when we get into the social, political, and the historical context. Again, we'll try to talk about that in the latter half of this video. But this is my way to say that, and then also then going back to how I started this conversation in terms of this film, Le Corbeau, as a mystery thriller, as a murder mystery thriller on certain levels, as a whodunit on a certain level, and as a film that is maybe there might be a sense of hope. There's also a sense of nihilism. There's also a sense of hopelessness. There might be a sense of the possibility, but also coupled or linked inextricably, with a sense of the hopelessness, and all portrayed in this way, in this grand way, in this unforgettable way, in this chilling way, told through the cinematic craft that is that of Henri-Georges Cluzot. And it is this work which is once again returning to the Criterion Collection with this release, and that is Le Corbeau. The Criterion Collection has released this film, or re-released this film, as we should say, Le Corbeau, at spy number 227. And I say re-released because, as some of you may know, this film had been a DVD, again at set spy number 227. It then fell out of print, that's my understanding. And so for a long time, this was not part of the in-print physical media catalog collection of the Criterion Collection. But now, with the return of this, or this announcement, or now this new Blu-ray from this year 2022, we see it return to the Criterion Collection. And this time, with this Blu-ray edition, it is purported to be based on a 4K restoration. Now, I've taken the liberty of removing the insert, the fold-out insert, as part of this new Blu-ray packaging, or this new Blu-ray release, because on one of the pages of the insert, it actually says about the transfer, and I quote, "Le Corbeau is presented in its original aspect ratio of 1.37 to 1. This 4K restoration was created by Studio Canal with support from the Centre National du Cinéma et de l'Image Animée, from the 35 millimeter original camera negative, excuse me." And I continue on. "The original monaural soundtrack was also restored. And it says, with additional restoration carried out by the Criterion Collection. So this is purported to be based on 4K restoration. The look and sound of it is then potentially affected by this. And how is it so affected? Well, based on my frame of reference, and my frame of reference is this prior DVD release, and this prior DVD release was a digital transfer of this film at the time, and from the early 2000s. And so this was how I came to know the film and how I watched the film many times through this particular DVD release. And so I am used to this release. I find it to be very good presentation, very good look and sound. But with this frame of reference, I can say that for me, this 4K restoration presentation is for me quite splendid, quite outstanding indeed. There is a sharpness, a linear type of sharpness to the look, and there's a sense of the way in which I mean, it's a film that is about darkness, that's word, but it's also a film that is a lot to do with the sunlight, and it's a lot to do with the shooting of outdoors, but also to do with the way in which figures are looked upon, and also how they look upon such sort of environmental considerations. And I think those scenes, for example, are portrayed in a very distinct way, and there's a way in which they really pop out in to borrow that phrase or expression, in a way that's very positive, very much, and also in keeping with a crispness, excuse me, of the image. I'm very much in favor. I love this particular presentation release. That's not to say I didn't like the earlier DVD. I thought this was great. This was absolutely great. I enjoyed this thoroughly. But this is a wonderful return of this title, and plus a return in a form that is very pleasing to the eye and to the ear, I would say. So it's great that the Criterion Collection was able to release it in this form. Again, the 4K restoration created by Studio Canal is the basis for this Criterion release. So well done for being able to have this as the basis for the presentation. And then also going back to being able to have this title back into the Criterion Collection in the form that it is. This is one of those, I mean, the Criterion Collection is so great in many ways, and one of the ways can be said to be exemplified in a release like Le Corbeau. It is so complicated, it is so, as I say, controversial, and the subject matter and the production and the history of this film are aspects which are indeed very nuanced, very detailed. And so to have this release by Criterion to say guide us in terms of how we as viewers, as individual say consumers, and also viewers of this film, and viewers of cinema, how we can try to digest and reckon with and reconcile, or perhaps not be able to reconcile depending on how we might view it, and how to deal with this, as I say, complex and overwhelming work that is Le Corbeau. This is a great place to go in terms of the exploration of this and these issues and details. And indeed, that is we are guided along even further by the fact that this is a great restoration. So well done for being able to do this and for being able to bring this back into the collection in this way. So this is Le Corbeau for 2022. So with the discussion about the 4K restoration, or the brief discussion, now let us turn to what we can also find in terms of the supplements for this Blu-ray release. Now, the supplements that we can find now for this new release are, I understand, the same as to what we were able to find in the earlier DVD. So there's nothing quote-unquote new in terms of this new Blu-ray release, or the occasion of this new Blu-ray release. Now, that might look disappointing to some, but I want to emphasize that what we had before was really quite something. Actually, I should point out that there's one exception to the continuation, or the continuity between DVD and Blu-ray. And I'll get to that later when we talk about the insert or booklet. But in terms of the supplements themselves that are found within or inside, embedded in the disc itself, what do we have? So the first supplement, and it's a great one. We had it on the earlier DVD, but we have it here again. And this is a discussion, a one-on-one discussion with the great filmmaker and critic and cinema lover, admirer, Bertrand Tavernier. And this is Bertrand Tavernier on Le Corbeau, And this is described as being from 2002. I think the copyright mark at the end of the discussion, I think, indicates 2003. So it's a 2002, 2003 supplement, and it's carried over again from the DVE, but it is great. I'm glad this is carried over. If you haven't seen this conversation with Tavernier about Le Corbeau, oh my goodness, you are in for a treat, because Tavernier goes through so many levels and reasonings as to why this film is complex and rich and worthy of a discussion. It is very worthy of a discussion, and he doesn't shy away from talking about the controversial points of this film, and again, that has to do in many aspects with the context of the history, and again, the historical record and the reckoning with history. That has to do with Henri-Georges Cluzot, and specifically about continental films, and Alfred Grevin, and the links to, or the discussion about the connections, or the interactions, or the context of the existence of continental films and the Nazi regime during the occupation. So here is the source, or here is the area in which the controversy, or the conversation about the controversy surrounding Le Corbeau, and indeed around Henri-Georges Cluzot and his works and his activities, cinema making activities, and the films that he made during this period. The Murderer Lives at 21. Excuse me here. L'Assassin habite au 21 from 1942, and then this film, Le Corbeau, which is follows that film. So this is the area in which the discussion about, and the debate, the Corbeau affair, as it was referred to in a lot of the newspapers, the newspaper debates that occurred during the liberation and after the liberation of France. But this is the debate that surrounds Le Corbeau and Cluzot, and it's referred to by Tavernier here. And indeed, when discussing this work, or considering this work, Le Corbeau, this is, I think, a place that one, as a viewer, it's highly recommended that one gets a sense of this as much as possible. And I think one area to do this is actually with this Tavernier discussion. So this is one aspect of the Tavernier discussion, excuse me, that is incredibly valuable. I mean, it's all valuable, don't get me wrong, but one example of that is the fact that he touches upon it in, I think, great detail. And I think also he is a great admirer of Le Corbeau and of Cluzot. You can tell that, especially how he continues the conversation about it, the artistic importance of this work, and how many artists and writers and filmmakers did come to the defense of Henri-Georges Cluzot and Le Corbeau after the liberation of France, and when this film was essentially on trial, when Cluzot was on trial for what was for whether or not he indeed collaborated with the Nazi regime during his time as a filmmaker during the occupation in continental films. So this was, and perhaps still is, a type of debate or discussion that is ongoing. And one can tell that Tavernier falls on one side of that debate, most likely because, again, of his participation with this discussion and his clear admiration and his reasoning behind such admiration for Le Corbeau. But that being said, I think he discusses the matter in the limited amount of time that he has, but he discusses the matter, I think, in a very clear way. And again, it's a good jumping off point for anyone who is interested in a further discussion and further research about the specifics behind Continental and Henri-Georges Cluzot and Grevin and other figures. And so this is, I think this is a good place to get a sense of that debate and discussion. And Tavernier expresses it so well. This is not the only place that he talks about Le Corbeau, or this is not the other context he talks about. He talks about also in terms of its controversy, how it was attacked on from both sides of the political spectrum, from the political right and also the political left. So the political right, he discusses it in terms of the conservatives, and the left in terms of the Communist Party, or the communists. And so we have the conservatives looking upon this film, or some of the attacks from the conservative viewpoint, or the politically conservative viewpoint, being such that it, in terms of depictions of characters that could be said to be morally repugnant from a certain perspective, discussions that could be said to be salacious, a type of ambiguity that is totally not in keeping with a sense of a type of quote unquote moral righteousness, or a similar type of line of argument, or viewpoint. Again, this is as Tavernier describes it on the one hand. And then on the other hand, Tavernier reminds us too that it was attacked also from the left in terms of its lack of heroism, and it's a lack of, and he describes too in this way about how the left, the attacks from the political left were also coming from a basis, or a hope or want of depictions of France during the war, the need for depictions of France during the war to be on a heroic basis, on a heroic level. And in that way, the depictions of the provincial community of Le Corbeau are actually far from it from a certain perspective. Again, it depends on one's interpretation of the film, of course, but from this vantage point, one can say that the attacks, the critical attacks from the political left also arose. So this was this film was found to be in a very precarious position. As Tavernier explains it, of course, it did have its champions, it did have its defenders, and that also emerged in the later debate when it came time to discuss this film and discuss Cluzot, and in fact debate this Le Corbeau affair, which is also touched upon a little bit later in the Tavernier discussion. Very fascinating. He also talks too, Tavernier does, about how this is based on the true story about a poison pen letter story, a situation that happened in an area called Tulle. Again, please pardon me for my poor pronunciation, but how this formed the basis of a story that then turned in the hands of Cluzot and company and the Chavons into this opportunity to discuss, I guess, maybe the seemingly devious nature of various clandestine relationships, and how this also could be seen to be a type of metaphor, if you will, for the occupation itself. And this is touched upon also in excellent detail by the Alan Williams essay in the insert. But this idea too about how this can be seen as the idea of the lack of trustworthiness, and people seemingly maybe telling on other people or informing on other people, and this idea of informants and undisclosed information, or people informing on others, this lack of trust that is expanding and exponentially growing, and in fact piling in on itself. This could be said to have a type of parallel, maybe chilling parallel, to the way in which certain types of, say, maybe informants might have operated during the occupation in terms of collaboration with the Nazi regime. And so that has that nuanced feel and nuanced, say, association with it, whether on purpose or not, and whether it's a direct result of the history of the film or not. It's definitely there, and so it adds to the chilling effect of it, and that makes the film all the more powerful, I think, as a viewing experience even now in the year 2022. And then also Tavernier then talks about the idea of censorship, and the idea generally of censorship during this of French cinema during the occupation, but how also maybe Continental Films was able to sidestep this because of maybe the certain nature of, say, how it fit into the context of the occupation, the Nazi occupation during this time. But that being said, this also allowed for the making of certain films, such as Cluzot's Le Corbeau. And then this is also a discussion that Tavernier gives about how this film is undoubtedly, thoroughly, by the by, and to the very essence of the film, it is a Henri-Georges Cluzot film. And it's so controlled. It has a design about it, the way that characters are framed, the way that even seemingly minor characters, or characters that have, relatively speaking, very small running time, are so memorable and so rendered and so well rendered, and they have such a significance in this world. I don't want to go into too much details, but indeed, sometimes we have even seemingly minor characters playing a significant major role in the world of Le Corbeau. And I think this is, as Tavernier puts it, an example of the guiding hand, if you will, of the directorial guidance and the skill and craft that is that of Cluzot. So this is a very important aspect indeed. Plus, also, Tavernier talks too about the liberation of France and the aftermath of this and what happened to Cluzot, the debate about Le Corbeau, the great debate, Le Corbeau affair, the affair of Le Corbeau, and how this affected many relationships, but also how this was part of Cluzot's legacy, but also how what happened to Cluzot's career, the potential threat to Cluzot's career, as well as what happened subsequent to the various decisions that affected Cluzot's career as well. So if you want more information about this, again, this discussion from Tavernier is an excellent place to go. I'm so glad that it was carried over from the earlier DVD. So well done for being able to do that. And if you haven't seen the Tavernier discussion, please do so, because it is so valuable. And again, it's shining so much light and information about this great work. Again, it's so well expressed by Tavernier, who's speaking so beautifully about this work. This is totaling 21 minutes, and he's speaking in English as well. So a wonderful discussion from Tavernier on Le Corbeau. So that's the first supplement. The second supplement, which we can also find from the earlier DVD, is in the supplements menu labeled Henri-Georges Cluzot. And indeed, this is an excerpt from a 1975 program, which is referred to here in English as The Story of French Cinema by Those Who Made It. This excerpt is totaling approximately 7 minutes. And we have a number of, say, scholars and filmmakers and artists and critics who are interviewed here, and they're talking essentially about the French cinema, or the state of French cinema during the occupation, during the early 1940s. And this is where I made the reference earlier in the video discussion about entertainment, but the necessity and need for entertainment, not as a type of, not in the form of, in the words of one of the critics here, not in the sense of a banal meaning, but rather in a very important meaning, to escape the harshnesses, the harsh nature of the lives that these people, or the experiences that these people were experiencing during the occupation war years. But also there's a discussion here that we heard before about Continental, about Tulle, about Crevin, Alfred Crevin, also about Henri-Georges Cluzot himself. And indeed, we get some excerpts of a discussion, an interview with Henri-Georges Cluzot himself. This is fascinating. This is so fascinating. We talk here, or there's discussion here about the techniques that are employed in Le Corbeau, suspense techniques, and how Cluzot is able to utilize these, because as we know from those who know of Cluzot's body of work, I mean, one of the words that can be used to describe his great body of work is indeed the application of techniques of suspense, and he does so brilliantly in many examples of his filmography, and Le Corbeau is one such example. As I mentioned before, you can see this as a suspense film, and indeed it is, and it's really filled with a lot of tension. And so it's great to hear some comment about this by Cluzot and others, and also the notion of darkness and light in the context of the framing, but also in the context of the moral ambiguity of the characters, and the moral rot of the characters, if one can say. So for these and other reasons, this is a very essential supplement to consider, again, to further give some guidance and further jumping off points regarding maybe the discussion of the historical context of this film, as well as how this film fits into the register of French cinema during this period of the early 1940s, and also how it fits into the context of Henri-Georges Cluzot's cinema itself, as well as hearing from Henri-Georges Cluzot, the filmmaker and artist. So a wonderful inclusion, and it's great to have it. It was part of the earlier DVD, but it's great to have it here again with this new Blu-ray. And then the supplements in the disc itself are rounded out by a trailer, which we also saw. So as you might see here, the number or the quantity of the supplements is maybe, relatively speaking, not as much as, say, others. And maybe it might have been really nice to have seen maybe new supplements on the occasion of this new Blu-ray release. I would have been very curious to see if that could have been possible, and if that had happened, I would have been very curious to see those indeed. But that being said, we have this continuity from the earlier DVD. But that being said, what we had before was really enlightening and really quite brilliant. And so if you haven't seen those earlier DVD supplements, now is your opportunity because of the reemergence of this title into the Criterion Collection catalog with this new Blu-ray. So I strongly, strongly encourage you to check those supplements out if you can. They are really excellent. Now I should go to another very important point, which is the insert here. The insert, well, actually, before I go to that, I should point out too that the cover art design is very similar, very, very similar, almost exactly the same as that which we found on the earlier DVD. This is the DVD that I have here. According to this is the first printing from 2004. I should say too that there are some slight differences. For example, the back has this way of presenting the information here, but you can see the Blu-ray is continuing the white motif here, although the drawing or the cover art design itself looks to be the same or almost exactly the same. There's also an interesting detail on the earlier DVD. If you look at the spine, the actual spine number, which is right here, it says 227 in this font, which is, I think, in keeping with the cover art design of Le Corbeau, whereas the spine number for the new Blu-ray is in the typed face that is common for the spine number itself that can be found on the spines of the Criterion release. So that's okay. I was fascinated because this has always stood out when you put it on the shelf in a good way. I really like this, but it's okay to have the spine number in the standard font of spine numbers, in a manner of speaking. So that's the cover art design of the design itself. I should point out that the art is art director Sarah Habibi, designer Eric Skillman, illustrations G Club. So there is the continuation of the art design here. So very exciting indeed. Now, I'd like to go to the booklet and the issue of the booklet, or the fold out here. Now, it is a fold out type, which I'm not a fan of. And indeed, the fold out type it's cool that it continues the motif of the cover art design, because it's a really cool motif with the idea of the inkwell and the poison pen letters and the writing of the letters in ink, and the raven, of course, Le Corbeau, and the provincial town idea, and the handwritten nature, which makes it even more sinister in an interesting way. So that motif is continuing on nicely here. But again, I would have much rather preferred the staple booklet. I'm a big fan of that. Now, that being said, it does include the great essay, which is called Grasping for Light by Alan Williams. The essay, Grasping for Light, did appear in the earlier booklet from the DVD, which is right here too as well. But it's a great essay, and again, it talks about the many levels of the film Le Corbeau in a way that's much more articulate, much more pointed than I could ever hope to try to talk about in a video discussion like this. So if you're looking for a much better discussion of Le Corbeau than I could ever hope to achieve, go to the Alan Williams discussion essay called Grasping for Light. It's really great. It's really excellent. And as I say, we found the essay on the earlier DVD booklet right here. Now, I have the earlier DVD booklet right here, and I've removed it from the DVD case itself. It is a staple booklet, or it had been a staple booklet in the DVD release era, which is one of the reasons why I'm a little bit disappointed by the fold-out. I'm not disappointed by the inclusion of the essay, don't get me wrong, but the fold-out aspect I'm not a big fan of, especially because we had the earlier DVD, which had the staple booklet. Because in addition to that essay, the Williams essay, in the DVD booklet, we also had two other writings, which are unfortunately not included with this new Blu-ray insert. And this is a shame, because these two writings, which were in the earlier DVD booklet, are so crucial and so important, again, in the context of what we've been talking about, or just briefly touching upon, which is the historical reckoning that had been going on with the so-called Le Corbeau affair, and the controversy surrounding Cluzot and his filmmaking endeavors during the occupation period of France. And so what we have in terms of the DVD, we had two writings on this. One was by Henri-Georges And this is called The Return of Cluzot's Le Corbeau, or The Commies versus Le Corbeau. And Henri-Georges wrote this, and this is in English. This is translated into English. And this was essentially defending Le Corbeau during this scandal, during this controversy that surrounded it. And so in 1947. And then what you also have is a writing, a response to this by Joseph Cassel. And this is a very, this is also from 1947. And this is taking the opposite view. It's the other side of the debate, really in a way which I would strongly suggest. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but it is on the other side of the debate in the Corbeau affair. So Cassel's writing and then Janson's writing here, had they been included in the Blu-ray insert or booklet or whatever the case may have been, I think that would have made it perfect. That would have been so great, because this is so important as well, again, to further add more nuance and discussion points and details to this so-called Le Corbeau affair. And as I point out, I really find this to be so crucial in terms of my own engagement with the film and my own examination and my own discovery when it comes to the film. The history of this is so crucial. The fact that it's not included with the new Blu-ray, or these two additional writings aren't included with the Blu-ray booklet, is disappointing. I'm not sure why that was the case, but it would have been nice to have had. But if you can find those writings elsewhere, I strongly encourage you to check those out if you can, because again, they add more context and indeed more of the debate, discussion between the two sides with regard to the affair, or the Corbeau affair. So that just to keep in mind with respect to the new Blu-ray. But that's not to take away anything from the essay that is part of this Blu-ray release, the Williams essay, which I think is really great for reasons which I just mentioned. So that is a little bit about the booklet or the insert with regard to this new Blu-ray release. It's still a great release, though, by the way, because it's a fascinating, it's a dark film. It is filled with a lot of suspense and tension, a la the cinema of Henri-Georges Cluzot. It is also so complex, so nuanced in terms of what we see on screen and also what we know occurred backstage or behind the scenes, and its production history, and then this history subsequent to that. So it's so rich, and it's so enveloping, and it's so filled with a lot of points of discussion. And I hope that those points of discussion can continue to be ongoing and lively and rich and rewarding for all people concerned when they engage with this work, again, upon the occasion of this new great release from Criterion. This is the work which is Le Corbeau. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.